This will be my last week for a while. We don't have firm schedules, so I don't know exactly how long until I'll pick back up, but Jimmy's going to take over for a while. We're coming up on my busy season and winter too, so you never know if there's a week that I won't be able to be here with traffic and stuff, where Jimmy lives pretty close, so he's much more consistent at that point. You can get here, yep. So we're going to cut off Job here midstream and let Jimmy pick up something, which if we have time, he might have a little bit to say about that here later on. Not, I'll carry through this lesson, and then he'll pick up next week. So we're going to cut off from Job, and then we'll pick up at some point in the future, as long as we're able to. I won't go through a summary of what we've been doing because I want to get through chapter 14 here. If I have time, I'll circle back around and kind of hit some of the highlights that I think we've talked about over the last few months as we've gone through this study. So are we ready to do Job 14? Looks like we might be having some issues back there.
Your mic keeps cutting out, so we're going to swap you out.
All right. I got it up high enough this time. It's not because of where it's at.
Man that is born of a woman. Chapter 14. Man that is born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. He cometh forth like a flower, and is cut down. He fleeth also as a shadow, and continueth not. And dost thou open thine eyes upon such an one, and bringest me into judgment with thee? Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? Not one. Seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. Turn from him, that he may rest, till he shall accomplish as an hireling his day. For there is hope of a tree, if it be cut down, that it will sprout again, and that the tender branch thereof will not cease. Though the root thereof wax old in the earth, and the stalk thereof die in the ground, yet through the scent of water it will bud, and bring forth boughs like a plant. But man dieth, and wasteth away. Yea, man giveth up the ghost, and where is he? As the waters fail from the sea, and the flood decayeth and drieth up, so man lieth down, and riseth not. Till the heavens be no more, they shall not awake, nor be raised out of their sleep. Oh, that thou wouldest hide me in the grave, that thou wouldest keep me secret until thy wrath be past, that thou wouldest appoint me a set time, and remember me. If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change come. Thou shalt call, and I will answer thee. Thou wilt have a desire to the work of thine hands. For now thou numberest my steps. Dost thou not watch over my sin? My transgression is sealed up in a bag, and thou sewest up mine iniquity. And surely the mountain falling cometh to naught, and the rock is removed out of his place. The waters wear the stones. Thou washest away the things which grow out of the dust of the earth, and thou destroyest the hope of man. Thou prevailest forever against him, and he passeth. Thou changest his countenance, and sendest him away. His sons come to honor, and he knoweth it not. And they are brought low, but he perceiveth it not of them. But his flesh upon him shall have pain, and his soul within him shall mourn.
I'm not going to go back and summarize. All right, I'm not going to go back and summarize everything that we talked about, but just kind of to bring us where we're at with Job, he is currently responding to one of his friends, Zophar, who was very critical of him, and we've been talking about like some things that we need to consider when from two different perspectives. One, when you're being critical of someone or analyzing what they're doing, and also how to receive it whenever somebody's being critical of you, or how to look at it. So we were kind of talking about that, and talking about some things that we need to think about in those situations where we're having discussions about opinions or about what we think about things, like how we should proceed with that and what kind of attitude we should have, what kind of things we need to consider about, like, do you know all the facts, those kind of things. So that's where we're at. And Job in here is responding to Zophar's criticism at first, and then he turns to talking to God about, back to complaining. And we ended last week talking about hope and what can cause us to lose hope and how we can keep hope. And we're doing that because Job here is in pretty desperate situation, and he's kind of crying out to God and sometimes complaining, sometimes questioning, sometimes praying. He's kind of just doing all those things at the same time here. So that's where we're at as we get to Job 14. And here in the first part of 14, he again talks about how short life is, and he asks, who can make clean out of the unclean? Some people that I was reading seem to think that this is referring to original sin or inherited sin. I think we've talked about it in the class in the past, and of course, if you go to other scriptures, that concept's not in the scriptures, and so that's not what he's referring to here. Wayne Jackson says, he's simply identifying himself with the race of sinful humanity, with the fact that we are fallen people. And of course, also what we talked about back a few weeks ago about how, is there anything that God can't do? In this case, can God make something clean that is unclean? The answer is yes and no. He can't make something clean that's unclean according to his law unless he set up a way to do that, which is where Jesus comes into the picture and, how we get forgiveness of our sins. So, Job just is acknowledging a corrupt condition, but he's confused about why he's being punished so severely, because once again, he's not totally disagreeing with his friends that he's being punished for something, but he's denying that he's done anything to the level that his friends are saying you need to repent of what you've done in order to get away from this punishment. So Job pleads again for God to let him alone because of this belief that he's being punished. Verses 7 through 12, I think, are interesting. He compares a person to a tree and believes that the future of a tree is better than a person's future because the tree can sprout again after it dies. Now that, to me, hits home because I don't know if we have woods around our yard, and sometimes we try to clear a little bit of space to do something with it. And if you have sumac trees, you got to get rid of them from the root, because if you don't get the root out, they pop right back up and are very annoying. So I wrote that picture of that really makes sense to me, what he's saying. A tree can get cut down and sprout back up. What happens to a person? When a person dies, they don't come back. There's no resprouting of a person, right? So that metaphor kind of hits home whenever you think of it that way. He switches the metaphor then from a tree to water, and he says that man is like water that evaporates and is no more. In verse 12, he says that man lies down and does not rise. So what is Job's view of death here? Final. And is he saying that there is no more after death?
I don't think so.
I don't think, if you read the rest, as we go through the rest of what he says and different things, I don't think that's what he's getting at here. I think he's getting at it from a physical perspective. When we die, we don't come back physically anymore. Now, he may not have the full view that we have, because he didn't have the New Testament and the pictures of heaven and that view that we have now. But I do think he didn't. I don't think he's indicating that there's no soul to man, or that there's no further existence.
Even as he says that he's praying for God to kill him, he says, then I know you'll vindicate me.
Yeah, my hope is, yeah, right. So, and that goes back to what we talked about last week, too, with the one scripture where it talks about, I have no hope. But some translations say I have no hope, and some say something different. But either way, however you translate that, whether it's literal or figurative, the next verse he's talking about, it's my hope, my salvation. So you have to kind of put them together there to get a full view of what's being said there. Then going down to verse 13, Job contemplates the benefits that would come with death. He asks a question in verse 14, what happens after I die? Will I live again? Job seems to indicate that he would endure his present pain if he could hope for life after death. It seems he has a glimmer of hope still, even though he's struggling at this point, which, as we talked about, I mean, anybody would be in his situation. He thinks that God will not number his steps and observe his sin after he dies as he is right now. And in verse 17, Job says, my transgression is sealed up. What does he mean by that? It says, my transgression is sealed up in a bag, and thou dost wrap up my iniquity. Maybe I should read a little bit more of that, because that's kind of in the middle of what he's saying there. He says, if a man dies, will he live again? All the days of my struggle I will wait until my change comes. Thou wilt call, and I will answer thee. Thou wilt long for the work of thy hands, for thou dost number thy steps. Thou dost not observe my sin. My transgression is sealed up in a bag, and thou dost wrap up my iniquity.
Sounds to me like it's a lament. Like he's saying that that you hold tightly my iniquities and don't let go of that.
That's
because he's kind of I mean, all of Job is him just screaming and crying out, venting and saying, basically life is unfair. You've targeted me.
Well, not all of it, but at parts that's where he's doing. That's what he's doing. He's complaining that I'm being treated unfairly. So that could be one way that he might be talking about it. He might be saying they're there and you won't let go of them. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that if he's referring to hereafter, he could be saying that when he's raised, his offenses would be sealed up in a bag and he'd have a new start, something to start over again with, a glimmer of hope. So here again, it depends on which way you think he's leaning at this point. Is he in desperation, or is he looking toward God and saying, you are my hope?
Yes.
You think the last one there, huh?
Both of them.
Or both of them, okay. So, yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, he's going back and forth on this the whole way as he's discussing this. Then in verses 18 through 22, he uses more metaphors from nature to discuss his current state. He refers to a mountain crumbling and washing away, as that's a picture of hope being destroyed. He says that once dead, a person no longer sees or cares about what's happening to their children. And we're not going to go down a debate of what happens in between the time now when we die versus when Jesus comes back. But there's a lot of different thinking on that, I think. But here again, he's talking about, I think he's referring to the fact that we're no longer physically present on earth. When we die, we don't come back, and we don't have anything to do with what's happening here. And then he says that the person just feels their own pain, and it's here again, it seems like he slipped back into the all's doom and despair at that point. Certainly he's in a state of despair here. What are some things that we might be able to remember or to think about when we're dealing with a large amount of suffering or discouragement in our lives? And as we talked about, sometimes life has its ups and downs, and if we live long enough, we're all going to go through those peaks and valleys. So when we're in a valley and we're suffering or we're full of discouragement, what are some things that we can remember or think about that can help us in dealing with that? And once again, I know, as we mentioned, there's really nothing that can be said when you're at that point. Charles has brought that out, I think, at that point, you're just in that situation. You're dealing with it. What can help us in dealing with that situation if we've developed the right character and relationship with God? What can help us as we go through that, especially whenever it's something that is never going to go away? Like, we have a lot of people, I think, a lot of members who are suffering with health issues or things like that, and they're going to deal with that all their lives. So what kind of things can help as we deal with those kind of problems?
Better living through chemistry.
Well, that's where I was going to say, like I try to think about what's not helpful in those moments. And I'm glad you said that. Like, the longevity of suffering sometimes is just a reality. And that's a pretty crappy thing to have to face and deal with, to realize, like, the rest of my life is going to be altered forever till I die. So sprinkling Bible verses and telling people things are going to get better, that's not helpful in those moments. And I know for me, like, in this deepest, darkest moment of hurt and disparity, like, the best thing that helped me was just validation, validation that this really happened, and that it's really horrible, and that I'm just extremely angry with God right now. Like, I needed my 5 minutes with God to just yell and scream and kick and hurl insults, and, like, I needed that time. And
to know that it's not wrong to be angry or to be upset about that.
Yeah, that's part of lament.
Yeah.
Like Job, loathing the day that he was born. Saying, I wish I had never been born. I don't think he's literally saying that. I mean, in the moment he is, but, like, long term, I don't think that Job would come back and say, I wish I had never been born. I think that was just such an important part of lament, to just yell and shout at God and say, life is unfair. You allow this. At a bare minimum, you allow these things to happen to me.
Right, yeah.
And then I think the hope part of that is more of a, like, I think we often think about hope as this immediate fix. If you just hope in God, if you just have more faith, if you put your trust in God, things will get better. I think hope is more of a long-term, almost like the marathon that Paul talks about. Like, you're in this race, long-term.
And I always...
Fixed on the goal.
Yeah, I always like to talk about Paul because he as I mentioned last week or the week before, he had that view of anything that happens here is only important in how it furthers God's kingdom. Like, it's a very hard view to have, because we only know here. We only know what we're going through physically here on earth. But Paul had the view that his life his only purpose was to further what God wanted. And that's why he said, you see verses where he's talking about, I'd rather go on. It would be better for me to go on, but for your sake, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, but for your sake, I think it's good for me to stay, because there's something for me to do here. But Paul, you talk about suffering. I mean, Paul, as far as hope in this life, spent lots of time in jail, which probably wasn't very pleasant at that point. And then he got beaten however many times. I forget how many times we see. A lot. Beaten to the point of death. Picked himself back up and walked back into town after everybody thought he was dead. So he went through all kinds of suffering. Plus he had some kind of a physical ailment. There again, there's debate over exactly what that is, but we know he had some kind of a physical ailment because he talks about it in his letters. So he had a lot of suffering, and yet his view was always from an eternal viewpoint and what furthered God's will and God's kingdom. And that, of course, is where a lot of people get confused too on that verse where it talks about all things work together for good. It doesn't say for our good, like what we consider to be good. And so that's a passage that often gets said whenever things are going badly for people. But that's not what the verse says. Is if we keep that view, that eternal view, and we're trying to make everything do what God wants us to, it works together for good for God's purposes. So keeping that eternal viewpoint, I think, is extremely important. And along with that, like, you know, suffering is temporary. And once again, like I said, maybe not here, but if we have that eternal viewpoint, then we know that it's not going to be, or things will change when we die, and that we have that hope, which anybody who's not a Christian doesn't have that hope. And that's something to be concerned about with those around us. We need to look at people as if, you know, people's souls, and realize that the most important thing is, I mean, it's important when we try to take care of physical needs for people, but the spiritual is always where Jesus was focused. He gave them their physical needs, right? He helped out with that, but it was always with a goal of helping their spiritual condition. Also, something to keep in mind, and here again, when you're in the middle of the moment, I don't think that this would necessarily help you, but suffering is a useful thing. You know, God uses our trials to advance his kingdom here on earth. In fact, in Job's case, it was specifically that God called Job out to the devil and said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And that's what started the whole thing, right? It wasn't the devil coming to God and saying, I want you to attack Job. It was God calling Job out to the devil, and then the devil says, well, of course he serves you. You put this hedge around him. So that's also, and then suffering is Christ-like. Jesus suffered greatly here on earth, and Paul talks about that in Romans 5. 3-5, he says, "And not only this, but we also exult in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance, and perseverance proven character, and proven character hope. And hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us." And then also in chapter 8, verses 16-18, he says, "The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, heirs also, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, in order that we may also be glorified with him. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us." So Paul says that he exalted in tribulations because it develops character and hope, and he wants us to suffer with Christ in order to receive his glory. Once again, if you're trying to comfort somebody, that may not be the best way to go about trying to talk to somebody. But if we can keep that in mind during the good times, so that we're prepared for the bad times, I think that's more where it comes into play for ourselves, to prepare for the bad times ourselves. Also, 1 Peter 4. And if you remember, when Peter's writing this, the Christians were about to go through a severe persecution, or were undergoing a severe persecution. And it says in chapter 4, verses 12-19, he says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. By no means let any of you suffer as a murderer or thief or evildoer or a troublesome meddler, but if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not feel ashamed. But in that name let him glorify God. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God, and if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? Therefore let those also who suffer according to the will of God entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right." Just to rephrase that, if we suffer for doing something bad, is that a good thing? Not at all, right? But if we suffer because we're doing the right thing, because we're Christians, what does that do?
Now see, but that's kind of where it will, again, the monkey wrench here. That's all well and good and true.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, if as a Christian I'm suffering because I am a Christian and doing the right thing despite whatever the laws or the societal opinions are, that's one thing. But when you're suffering with no known reason,
Right. Yeah. That's definitely not what Peter is referring to here, because he's talking about persecution and being persecuted for doing what's right. I think Paul was talking a little bit more. What Paul had said was a little bit more along the lines of.
actually, I think what Paul says is exactly the same thing. Why is he being stoned?
Because of doing what's right. Yeah.
Because he's doing what's right. He's proclaiming God. Why do so many things happen to Paul? But
in that particular, in those passages, for sure.
Job, he's doing what's right, but he doesn't understand what's going on beyond that. So when we come up to people who are needlessly suffering, coming to them and saying, yeah, but this is glorifying God. I'm sorry. I've got trouble with that. I've got personal trouble with that.
Well, and the only,
Doesn't mean I don't trust God.
right.
But looking at it and going, this isn't helping the kingdom.
Well, and I guess that's how do we bring glory to God when we're suffering for something, for not doing the right thing, for just suffering like what we've talked about, as an example, people who just had the tornadoes go through. That's not suffering for doing what's right. That's just something that happened. So how do we bring glory to God in those situations?
By still doing what's right, and even in your depression and your anger and your hurt, hoping and realizing this is transitory.
Right. Yep. So we bring it by bring glory to God by the way we react to that, and by still doing the right thing, and by keeping our hope in God, which is what we kind of talked about a little bit last week about how do we keep that hope when we're going through these bad things. So, as we said in chapter 14, I think basically to summarize it, he's discussing the shortness of our lives and kind of, as Jimmy said, complaining about like what's the point? Why is all this happening? Does it remind you of anybody else's writing as you read that?
Sounds a lot like Ecclesiastes to me.
Yep, and that's where we're going to go. We're going to go to Ecclesiastes because I wanted to look a little bit about that. It reminds me of Solomon and how he writes about the shortness and uselessness or futility of life. And he does it some in Proverbs too. You can see it some in Proverbs, but the main place that we see it is in Ecclesiastes. And he discusses, how he tried to do different things to find fulfillment and satisfaction in his life. He talks about how everything is worthless, and it's a pretty bleak view. But there are several times in Ecclesiastes that he mentions where a person can find worth. I think one of the most common verses that we go to would be Ecclesiastes 12, but there are several others as well. If you go to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, we'll start there and we'll end on 12, but Ecclesiastes 2:24 through 26. He says, there is nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? For to a person who is good in his sight, he is given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he is given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after wind. And then before I comment, I'll read a couple others. Ecclesiastes 3:12 through 14. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor, It is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will remain forever. There is nothing to add to it, and there is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear him. That which is has been already, and that which will be has been already been, for God seeks what has passed by. And then down 19 through 22 there, for the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they have all the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast. For all is vanity, all go to the same place, all came from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward, and the breath of beast descends downward to the earth? And I have seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? And then 5:18 through 20. He says, here is what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor, in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life, which God has given him, for this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God, for he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. And then finally, Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hand finds to do, verily, do it with your might, for there is no activity or planning or wisdom in Sheol where you are going. All right, so all those passages, what kind of rang through in those?
Don't worry about tomorrow. You've got enough problems today. Enjoy what you got.
Yeah, to me, it's take advantage of what you have right now. Use it to work with all your might, and use it to bring glory to God. And then, of course, to wrap that up, Ecclesiastes 12:13 and 14, the conclusion when all has been heard is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So life's short. Life's uncertain. We don't know what tomorrow holds. We need to use every day to do good. It appears that, Solomon, we know that he went way off the rails. Based off of Ecclesiastes, it seems that he kind of figured out where he had gone wrong. He at least recognized his error, whether he corrected it completely or not. And of course, he was the wisest person to ever live, other than God. So it would make sense that he would at least realize his error in what he had done. But I think it's just important for us to realize that we're not guaranteed tomorrow, and that we need to take advantage of each day that we have and to do good. I think Jimmy and Charles have talked about that a lot. We just need to do what we can and do it to the best of our ability. Put your effort into it. Don't do a halfway job. Try to bring out our best, the best that we can do, in whatever it is that we're doing. Anybody have any other comments on we just finished the first series of speeches in Job. Wendy tells me that she didn't like me going through all those weeks of talking about good versus evil and those kind of things. She likes me going through the chapters. but we did spend a lot of time talking about...
Just on Job 8, I thought we were there.
Oh, just Job 8, okay. But we did do a lot of discussion as we went through, especially the first part of Job, where we laid some groundwork for, talking about why evil and suffering exist, and why God created the world the way he did. But before I mention anything else, any other thoughts? All right, well then, just like I said, I wanted to do a real quick summary, kind of just to bring us up to where we were. Of course, we started off going through the first two chapters and the last chapter of Job just to give the situation of what was happening. The couple of main things I hope everybody kind of brings away from the series. We talked about the devil. We've spent 2 or 3 weeks talking about the devil and making sure that to talk, we shouldn't underestimate the devil and we shouldn't overestimate the devil. He's a powerful adversary, and he's after us, and his biggest weapon is distorting the truth and tweaking. We talked about how he just tweaks, how many people think that they're in good shape because they think that they're obeying God and they haven't really gone to the Word and looked at it. So just tweaking the truth is a big place where the devil gets people. And but at the same time, he's not all powerful. He's not all knowing. God is going to has won the victory over him, and so we can win the victory over him as well. So that was one of the big things that I want everybody to bring away from it. We also talked about how we spent several weeks talking about pain, evil, and suffering, and how that relates. How can a God who is all-powerful and all good, if God is all-powerful and all good, how can there be evil, pain, and suffering? Because that's a place where a lot of people get hung up, especially when you're talking about children suffering, people, what we consider to be needless suffering, people that we don't understand why these things happen. A lot of people get hung up on that. And so we talked about how God created the world, that it is not contradictory that evil exists, because by giving us a choice, whether we were going to serve him or not, that meant that evil is going to exist. Because if we choose to not do God's will, that by definition is evil. So in order to create the world where we have that choice, it's not contradictory that there's evil, pain, and suffering, even though God is all good and all powerful. So that I think it was an important point that we came out, and we went through specifically a lot of examples and a lot of things. The one that I always liked is just that when you're talking about, is there such a thing as an all-powerful, omnipotent, if I can say that right, being, is there something that they can't do? And the example that they gave, that Thomas Warren gave in his book, was God can't create a four-sided triangle. He could, but that would defy all the laws and everything that he's established for us. Because the definition of a triangle is it's a three-sided shape. So we went through a lot of examples online, but that one kind of just always registers with me as being a good example, because if you were to break down those laws and say, well, yeah, God creates a four-sided triangle, well, then everything else would get turned upside down. Like, you have to break all the rules and all the laws. Same thing like we talked about with, like, if an axe was sharp enough to cut through wood, but then if somebody were going to use it on another person, it would have to be dull or not be able to go through. So, like, the physical laws that God's established and those things, we wouldn't live in a world that has any consistency or anything. And we also talked about how without suffering and those kind of things, there is no bravery or anything. Like, it wouldn't be brave to run into a burning building if no harm could come to anybody. So anyway, and I know that some of that is just from our perspective and from what we see, but I think it does go a long ways in talking about how good and evil and pain and suffering, how that relates to God and what he's created. In the world that he's created and the choice that we have. And then, of course, we've gotten now into discussing the pain and suffering that Job's going through and how we respond to criticism, how we should respond when we're going through a bad situation, what it takes to have that hope and faith. So that's kind of hopefully some of what you've gotten out of the series so far. I'm sure you remember every word that I've said. I always forget where I left off last week, and I have to kind of make sure, so I know that if I don't remember, you guys don't remember. But hopefully some of those main points kind of stick, and that it helps as you go through. So anyway, I guess we have about 1 minute for Jimmy if he wants to, if you want to get up and talk at all, or we can just wait till next week for...
Yeah, I don't need to get up.
All right.
Just kind of throwing some ideas around, but I think something that would be really relevant is a topic like finding hope in a troubled world. You see a lot of stuff going on that I think people are really struggling with. And I think that theme of hope, how do you find hope when life just is beating you up like crazy from every angle? And, it's kind of similar to suffering in Job, but, it's the hope. How do you pull through it? How do you make it another day? How do you function? How do you function and then move from that to thriving? How do you process trauma? There are so many different things that are going on in life. And I think the Bible speaks a lot to it. And, again, soapbox, but one of my big pet peeves is people just sprinkling Bible verses on people saying life will get better. Well, that's just not how it works. That's not how life works. And I think as Christians, we owe people a much better answer than God will take care of you and things will get better. So it's kind of